Hey everyone, Pav here, lead market analyst here at Swyftx, and I don't even know where to start with this one. Really, just when you thought the stories around the tariffs and what's been happening in the US and in the globe really, and this global trade war, couldn't possibly see any more twists and turns. What if I told you now it's all null and void? At least that's what a US Court of International Trade has laid down just today, actually very early this morning on Thursday, and this is a big one. We've seen a lot of negative sentiment and quite a bit of fear ruling the market. The idea that a trade war could spark a lot of negativity in the broader market economy, short term and long term. We just didn't know what effects it might have. Right now, the basic consensus is that, I'll read what the three-judge panel said in their decision. The court does not pass upon the wisdom or likely effectiveness of the president's use of tariffs as leverage. That use is impermissible, not because it's unwise or ineffective, but because federal law doesn't allow it. So they're basically saying that the sweeping tariffs is an absolute overreach of the powers that the president has, even in an emergency situation. It really comes down to Congress. So obviously from here, the White House does have the option to go back and fight and appeal against this order. There are some talks that they may look at exploring options that they've enacted in the past in terms of getting tariffs over in the previous administration. But overall, this definitely throws, in terms of sentiment, a big hole in the whole tariff agenda that's come from the Trump administration and the impact that's had on the market. We could take the view that even though it may come back in the future at some point, it simply won't take the form or shape that it had to this point. And that is where it gets quite exciting for us, obviously, as investors in crypto. We've seen a lot of good news come through that really hasn't cut through a lot of this noise. Most recently, we had Texas greenlighting a Bitcoin reserve, heading straight to the governor's desk there for approval. We've even seen more corporates enter the space, with GameStop confirming the purchase of over $500 million worth of Bitcoin recently. And at the end of the day, this is a surprise and the market will digest it. Likely we'll see a repositioning, so we could see quite a bit of volatility. But what if I told you there was another surprise that we could be in for this week? What I want to point to here is particularly looking at growth, specifically in the US again. So tonight at 10:30 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, we have the preliminary GDP, or gross domestic product, figures coming out. Now, this one's an important one because last quarter, we did see negative growth in the US economy to kick off 2025. And again, that may not come as any surprise. There is a bit of nuance to it, but the key takeaway is we haven't really seen negative growth since 2022 when the inflation crisis really kicked off. There is concerns that with a forecast now set by the Bureau of Economic Analysis in the US for another negative quarter, it gets a bit doom and gloom. But what we want to highlight today is that the data really is suggesting a different picture. The idea is if the US largest consumer base is slowing down their growth, their consumption is going to be affected, and the whole world goes through a slowdown. And the nasty and scaremongering way to say the word slowdown is recession, so the big R word. So obviously the scare of a recession is definitely going to affect the mood and sentiment of people. And I really recommend you check out a post that I did on X. It goes through this a bit more thoroughly. But the key takeaways are that when we look at some of the key modeling data that's out there and available, that is more of a real-time look at how GDP is looking in terms of estimates. The Atlanta Fed's GDP Now is a frequented modeling system to see what the consensus is from blue chip companies, as well as their own modeling. What is it showing using the data that's available to us today for this quarter so far? And they're expecting 2.1%. Knowing what we know today. Very stark difference from the preliminary forecast that we're seeing for negative 0.3%. So again, if we're always talking about in these situations the market's expectations versus reality, it really sets up a very polarizing view, particularly when we also look at job data out of the US as well. We have seen employment last month grow to the point where the forecast was 173,000 and the actual result was 228,000. So that's quite a big discrepancy. And again, if we were in a position where a recession was looking likely, you really wouldn't see these growth figures in the labor market, generally speaking. So while anything's possible, the data is definitely skewed to the side that the forecast potentially could be, again, another surprise, right? So another positive tailwind to blow into the market, throw some hope, some volatility, along with what we're seeing on the geopolitical front right now. So it's a very, very exciting period of the market right now. And then when we tie this into the bigger picture, the US is the largest consumer base and it houses the majority of the GDP in the world. If we look at the real GDP of countries around the world annualized from a year ago. And now real GDP is looking at the gross domestic product, but also taking into account inflation. Trend is green. We are seeing that there is growth across the globe And that's taking into account what we've seen at the start of this year. So it really sets up a pretty interesting narrative that while the media, as well as the general consensus from the forecasting that we're seeing, is pointing to that things are about to look worse, the data really isn't there to support that argument. And that's why I think tonight, 10:30 p.m, you've really got to set your alarms if you want to keep on top of this one and see what the next puzzle piece is that we're all going to get. We might see, again, another surprise event leading into the end of this week. And we're also leading into the end of this month as well. It's currently trading at $168,000. So again, all these culminating factors, there's a real possibility that we could see another all-time high to close off the month as well, or a very sharp rise to all-time highs as we approach the start of next month. So very interesting time to be paying attention. But that's it from me here today, guys. We'll see you again next week.